Imagine spending $2,000 on a brand new television today, watching it look absolutely stunning for the first few months, and then 10 years from now, staring at a screen that either still takes your breath away or one that has quietly turned into a shadow of what you paid for. That is the real question hiding behind every OLED versus mini-LED debate, and almost nobody talks about it honestly. Everyone focuses on which TV looks better in the store, under perfect lighting, playing a demo reel designed to make every screen look incredible. But nobody shows you what that same TV looks like after a decade of movie nights, sports marathons, gaming sessions, and yes, even that one show you left paused on screen for way too long. Think about the last major purchase you made that you expected to keep for years. A car, a mattress, maybe a kitchen appliance. You probably researched how it holds up over time, not just how it performs on day one. Televisions deserve that same scrutiny, yet most buying guides completely skip over it, leaving people to find out the hard way once burn-in or brightness fade quietly creeps in. In this video, we are going to dig deep into what actually happens to OLED and mini-LED televisions over 10 years of real use, based on manufacturer data, independent long-term testing, and real-world failure patterns. Before we get into it, if you care about making smart tech decisions that actually save you money and disappointment down the road, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and drop a comment letting us know which TV technology you're currently using and what problems, if any, you have noticed as it has aged. Your answers might genuinely help someone else watching this decide what to buy next. How OLED and mini-LED actually make light. To understand why these two technologies age so differently, you first need to understand how they create the picture you see on screen, because the entire aging story comes down to this one fundamental difference. OLED stands for Organic Light Emitting Diode, and the key word there is organic. Every single pixel in an OLED television is its own tiny light source, made from organic compounds that glow when electricity passes through them. This means each pixel can turn completely off, producing true, perfect black, because there is no light being generated at all in that spot. This is why OLED screens are famous for jaw-dropping contrast and colors that seem to pop off the screen, especially in dark scenes like a night sky full of stars or a dimly lit thriller. There's also no separate backlight needed, which is why OLED panels can be built impossibly thin, almost like a sheet of glass, and why they offer incredible viewing angles that stay consistent no matter where you sit in the room. Mini-LED works on a completely different principle. Instead of each pixel producing its own light, mini-LED is actually a clever evolution of traditional LCD technology. Behind the LCD panel, manufacturers pack in thousands of tiny LED lights, sometimes numbering anywhere from 2,000 to over 20,000 on flagship models, and these are grouped into hundreds or even thousands of separate dimming zones. Think of it like having a massive grid of small flashlights behind your screen instead of one giant floodlight, and each of those flashlights can be dimmed or brightened independently to create contrast. The crucial difference for our topic today is that these LEDs are inorganic, meaning they're built from more stable materials that do not degrade nearly as quickly or unevenly as the organic compounds inside an OLED panel. That single distinction, organic versus inorganic, is the root cause of almost every long-term difference we're about to explore. It helps to think of this difference the way you might think about two different kinds of light bulbs in your house. An OLED pixel is a bit like an old-fashioned incandescent bulb. It burns brightly and beautifully, but the filament inside is slowly wearing away every single time it is switched on, and that wear happens a little faster the harder you push it. A mini-LED backlight, on the other hand, behaves more like a modern LED bulb designed for tens of thousands of hours of use, built from tougher materials that resist that same kind of gradual breakdown. Neither analogy is perfect, since OLED panels are far more sophisticated than a household bulb, and modern engineering has done a lot to slow down their aging, but it gives you an intuitive sense of why one technology worries engineers about long-term image retention, while the other mostly worries about brightness slowly tapering off. The honest truth about OLED longevity. Manufacturers like Samsung and LG will tell you their OLED panels are rated to last somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 hours, which sounds incredibly impressive when you translate that into roughly 10 to 30 years of typical home viewing. But manufacturer numbers are always the best-case scenario, tested under controlled conditions that rarely match how people actually use televisions. This is where independent testing becomes so valuable, and the site RTings has become the gold standard for this kind of research because they run actual televisions continuously for years, tracking exactly how picture quality changes over time. In their accelerated long-term test, which pushed OLED panels through the equivalent of several years of heavy use in a much shorter time frame, every single OLED tested showed some degree of permanent burn-in after about 18 months of extreme static content viewing. Before that number scares you away from OLED entirely, understand that extreme static content in a lab is far harsher than how most people actually watch television, involving the same logo or ticker sitting frozen on screen for hours day after day without ever changing. For someone who watches a healthy mix of movies, sports, and streaming content, the reality looks very different. Under normal, varied usage, modern OLED panels can realistically last anywhere from 8 to 15 years or more before you notice meaningful degradation, though you should expect some gradual brightness fade along the way. The blue subpixels, in particular, tend to wear out faster than red or green, which over many years can cause a subtle shift in how colors appear, especially in bright scenes. The people who genuinely need to worry about burn-in are those who use their OLED as a computer monitor with a static taskbar, who watch the same news channel with a permanent ticker for hours every day, or who leave video game menus and health bars frozen on screen for extended sessions without ever pausing or turning off the display. While OLED gets most of the attention for its stunning picture quality, Mini-LED has quietly built a reputation as the technology you can trust to age gracefully without drama. Manufacturers rate the LED backlights inside Mini-LED televisions at around 100,000 hours, which works out to roughly 11 years of continuous, non-stop use, or well over 15 years if you were watching a more typical 2 to 3 hours a day. What makes this claim more believable than it might sound is how the independent testing has actually played out. RTing's long-term testing showed Mini-LED panels performing exceptionally well, with minimal visible degradation even after more than 10,000 hours of use. The reason comes back to that inorganic versus organic distinction we talked about earlier, combined with a bit of clever engineering. Because a Mini-LED backlight uses thousands of individual diodes rather than relying on each pixel to generate its own light, if one single LED happens to fail or dim slightly over the years, it is barely noticeable to the human eye, simply because there are so many neighboring LEDs picking up the slack. It's a bit like a stadium full of light towers. If one bulb burns out among thousands, nobody notices from the stands. This redundancy is why many LED televisions are widely expected to last 10 to 15 years or more, with stable brightness and, most importantly, no risk of the permanent burn-in that worries OLED owners. That said, Mini-LED is not entirely immune to aging concerns. Over time, you might notice a very gradual fade in overall brightness, and on certain models, known as RGB Mini-LED, which use separate red, green, and blue LEDs rather than white LEDs with a color filter, there is a possibility of slight color drift if those three colors of diodes happen to age at different rates. Manufacturers have started combating this with quantum dot layers, often marketed as QD Mini-LED, which helps stabilize color output and extend the useful lifespan of the picture quality even further. How your picture quality changes year by year. Let's paint a clearer picture of what a decade actually looks like for each technology, because raw numbers only tell part of the story. With OLED, the black levels and contrast that you fell in love with on day one remain remarkably consistent over the years, simply because the fundamental ability of each pixel to switch off completely never really goes away. What does change is brightness, and this is where the story gets interesting. Because blue subpixels degrade faster than red and green, you can expect peak brightness to drop somewhere between 20 and 30% over a full decade of use. And this fade tends to happen so gradually that many owners do not even notice until they compare their aging set side by side with a brand new model. Color accuracy can shift slightly for the same reason, though newer qd-oled panels, which pair organic emitters with quantum dot color filters, have shown noticeably better resistance to this kind of drift. Viewing angles, one of OLED's signature strengths, remain excellent throughout the TV's lifespan because that advantage comes from the display's fundamental structure rather than anything that degrades with age. Mini-LED tells a different story over those same 10 years. Brightness fade happens much more slowly, and because flagship Mini-LED models often start out with extremely high peak brightness, sometimes ranging from 1,500 to over 4,000 nits, even after a decade of gradual decline, these televisions can still comfortably out-brighten an aging OLED, particularly when displaying vivid HDR content like sunlit outdoor scenes or explosive action sequences. The local dimming zones that give Mini-LED its contrast may become very slightly less precise over the years as individual LEDs age at marginally different rates. But this is a subtle effect that most viewers would never consciously detect. Where Mini-LED does lag behind, both on day one and after 10 years, is viewing angles, since the technology still fundamentally relies on an LCD layer that was never designed to look perfect when viewed from the side. And this limitation neither improves nor significantly worsens with age. What actually breaks first on these TVs? Here's something that surprises a lot of people when they first learn it, and it might change how you think about long-term TV reliability entirely. In many real-world cases, it's not the display panel itself that fails first, it's the electronics supporting it. Power supply units are consistently identified as the single most common failure point across modern televisions, and this applies just as much to Mini-LED sets as it does to OLED sets. A cheap or aging power supply can fail from voltage spikes, from simply wearing out over years of daily use, or from poor ventilation causing heat buildup inside the television's chassis. This is actually one of the most practical takeaways from this entire discussion, because investing in a good surge protector can meaningfully extend the working life of either type of television, regardless of which display technology you choose. For OLED specifically, beyond the power supply concern, the panel itself can experience burn-in, as we discussed, along with the previously mentioned gradual brightness fade. In rare cases, individual dead pixels can also appear, and Artings actually documented one of their LG G2 test units failing at around the 24-month mark, specifically due to dead pixel issues, a reminder that even flagship panels are not entirely immune to manufacturing variants or individual unit defects. Wi-Fi modules and other internet-connected smart features have also been known to fail before the display itself shows any meaningful signs of aging, a bit ironic given how much attention gets paid to panel technology over these quieter background components. For Mini-LED, backlight uniformity issues are the main long-term concern, though, as we covered, individual LED failures within the thousands packed into a modern set are rare and essentially invisible thanks to the sheer redundancy built into the system. Color drift on RGB Mini-LED models remains the other watch point, typically becoming noticeable, if at all, somewhere in the 5 to 8 year range rather than immediately. The factors that decide your TV's fate. Understanding the technology is half the equation because how you personally use your television plays an enormous role in determining whether it ages gracefully or poorly. Your viewing habits matter more than almost anything else in this entire discussion. If you're someone who watches heavy static content, think 24-hour news channels with a permanent ticker along the bottom, or you use your television as a computer monitor with a fixed taskbar and desktop icons, or you're a gamer who leaves the same heads-up display sitting on screen for hours at a time, OLED's burn-in risk becomes a genuinely important consideration rather than a theoretical worry. Mini-LED simply does not have this vulnerability, making it the safer long-term choice for these specific use cases. On the other hand, if your typical viewing diet consists of movies, streaming shows, and varied sports content where the picture is constantly changing, OLED's degradation risk becomes almost negligible, and you get to enjoy its superior contrast without much downside. Room lighting is the next major factor, and it's one that people often underestimate when they're shopping. If your living room stays fairly dark or dimly lit, especially during evening sessions, OLED's perfect blacks and exceptional contrast will continue to look genuinely spectacular even as the panel ages, because that dark environment naturally hides the effects of gradual brightness fade. If instead you have a bright living room with large windows and lots of natural light pouring in during the day, Mini-LED's substantially higher peak brightness becomes a much bigger practical advantage, both immediately and years down the road, since you'll need that extra brightness just to overcome ambient light and see the picture clearly. Finally, panel quality and price tier matter enormously. Flagship OLED televisions like the LG G6, the Sony Bravia B2, or the Samsung S95F use advanced tandem OLED or qd-oled technology specifically engineered to slow down degradation and extend usable lifespan. And testing through 2026 suggests these premium panels can genuinely deliver a decade or more of strong performance. Budget OLED models, by contrast, often cut corners with lower-grade panels that carry a meaningfully higher burn-in risk and faster overall degradation. On the Mini-LED side, standard quantum dot models like the TCL QM8 or the Hisense U8 series have built strong reputations for reliability and minimal color drift, while premium RGB Mini-LED sets from Sony or TCL's higher-end Q9 and Q10 lines offer superior color performance but require that quantum dot stabilization technology to keep long-term drift in check. Best case and worst case, 10 years later. Let's make this concrete with a realistic best-case and worst-case scenario for each technology, since seeing it play out tends to stick with people more than abstract statistics. Picture an OLED owner who watches 3 to 4 hours a day of mixed content, movies, streaming shows, the occasional sports game, keeping brightness moderate while leaving pixel shift protection enabled, a feature most modern OLEDs include to fight burn-in by subtly shifting the image every so often. 10 years later, that television still looks genuinely great in a dark room. Blacks remain essentially perfect, there is no visible burn-in, and only the most attentive viewer would notice a slight softening in peak brightness. Now picture the worst case, someone running their OLED 6 or more hours a day on static content, perhaps a home office setup with the same desktop visible for most of the day, at maximum brightness with pixel shift turned off. Well before 10 years, this owner is likely looking at visible ghost images burned into the panel, noticeably faded brightness, and color shifts significant enough to prompt an early replacement. On the Mini-LED side, imagine an owner who watches 4 to 6 hours daily of a healthy mix that includes plenty of HDR movies and gaming sessions, running at higher brightness settings to fully enjoy that HDR content with local dimming active. A decade later, that television remains impressively bright. Brightness fade is minimal, there is zero burn-in to worry about, and even if it is one of the RGB variants, any color drift is subtle enough to go largely unnoticed during normal viewing. The worst case for Mini-LED involves someone running the television 8 or more hours a day at maximum brightness in a poorly ventilated hot room without surge protection. Here, the panel itself likely remains functional, but that power supply failure point becomes a real risk, along with somewhat accelerated brightness fade and possible color drift on RGB models exposed to that kind of thermal stress. Which TV wins for your living room? So after walking through everything, how do you actually decide which technology deserves a spot in your home for the next decade? The honest answer is that it genuinely depends on your specific situation, and anyone who tells you one technology is simply better across the board in every scenario is oversimplifying a fairly nuanced decision. OLED remains the clear winner if you primarily watch in a dark or dimly lit room, since that environment lets its perfect blacks and exceptional contrast shine for years without the fade becoming noticeable. It also makes sense if your content habits lean toward varied, constantly changing programming rather than static images, and if you personally value contrast and viewing angle consistency more than raw brightness numbers. Investing in a flagship model with tandem or QD-OLED technology further strengthens the case, since these premium panels are specifically engineered to minimize the long-term weaknesses we have discussed throughout this video. Mini-LED, meanwhile, becomes the smarter long-term choice if your living room gets flooded with natural light during the day, if your household regularly watches static content like news programming, or uses the television as a secondary computer display, or if maximum HDR brightness genuinely matters to how you experience movies and games. It is simply the lower anxiety choice for anyone who does not want to think about burn-in risk at all, since that concern essentially does not exist for this technology. There's no universally correct answer here, only the answer that correctly matches your room, your viewing habits, and what you personally value most in a picture. What your budget and warranty really buy you. Warranty coverage is a useful signal too. Premium OLED brands often back flagship panels with 2 to 5 year burn-in warranties, showing real confidence in durability, while budget OLEDs usually stick to standard 1-year coverage with little burn-in protection. Reading the fine print and generally favoring a proven flagship over the cheapest set with flashy specs tends to pay off far more reliably over a decade. The real answer to the 10-year question? Strip away the marketing, and both OLED and Mini-LED can look fantastic a decade in, as long as you respect how each one ages. OLED rewards dark rooms and varied content with unmatched contrast. Mini-LED rewards brightness, static content, and total peace of mind on burn-in risk. The real deciding factor isn't which technology is better, it's which one matches how you actually watch TV. If this helped, hit like, subscribe for more research-backed tech comparisons, and tell us in the comments which one you're leaning toward or already own and how it's held up.